Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the latest instalment in our series of Intelligent Acquisition webinars, which are a co-production between Whistle and Join the Dots. So my co-host off camera is Ben Briggs, Managing Partner of Join the Dots, and we're both delighted to welcome you to this particular session. So thank you very much for sparing the time, and we hope we'll make it worth your while. We have themed today's event around e-commerce, since it's a highly topical subject, particularly post-pandemic. And we have gathered a group of speakers who, we're delighted could also spare the time to come and share some of their wisdom with you. So I'll introduce them in due course. In terms of give you a view of that. Here we have them. We have, delighted to say, our engagement director of JIC Mail, Mark Cross, who will be kicking us off in just a few moments. Then we're also joined by James Wheel, founder of Paper and Pixels Creative, to talk all things creative. Then, as promised, Ben, and joined by Sarah, the head of media partnerships at Join the Dots, will also give us a session on integrating other media. And last but not least, our client Hannah from Oddbox, senior growth manager at Oddbox, will tell from her own experience about the value of bringing print into a digital marketing mix. So that's the lineup, and they are here in virtual life, but they'll come on camera as and when in terms of their sessions. A little bit of housekeeping from me first of all. Just to say that this session is being recorded, yeah, for the speakers, if you want to show your mum, then we can send over the copy of the recording. For those obviously watching who would like to share it with their teammates who couldn't make it, or you just want to see some of the best bits on catch up, then it'll be made available to you again after this session. We've got your mics off at the moment. Normally in real life, we'd be saying to have your phones on silent. You can do what you want with your phones, I guess. But yeah, the mics are off. And the last advice, I think, based on that icon is don't swear. But if it's not that, then it's probably to please filter any questions through the Q&A function, which you'll find there. So any questions that you actually have for us throughout the proceedings, please write them into the Q&A, and hopefully we'll have time to come back and answer those questions towards the end of the session. So that's the plan. And broadly, here's the agenda. So as I say, Mark will kick us off in a few minutes with some of the latest, hottest, freshest insights from JIC Mail. Then James will take over and talk to us about how offline can creatively drive online. You'll have to bear with me while I bang on a bit for about 20 minutes in the middle. And then Ben and Sarah will hand over eventually to Hannah to close the proceedings in terms of the content. And then, as I say, we'll all come back on and hopefully cover off some of the questions that you've asked. So that's the plan. Let's hope the technology enables us to stick with that plan. Let's go. So, as I say, my first pleasure is to introduce Mark Cross, who is the engagement director of JIC Mail, the industry's audience research tool, and he'll explain a little bit more for those that are unfamiliar with JIC Mail about what it is, and importantly, what you can learn from this wonderful, wonderful thing. So, Mark, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Lovely. So, no, really pleased to be with you this afternoon to really take you through excuse the pun, whistle stop through some of the kind of core trends that we've seen through the JIC Mail data over the last 18 months or so. And yes, next chart, thank you, Mark. And again, just reminding that we've updated our analysis of the kind of mail channel, and as a reminder, and it's worth reminding people that even in 2021, mail remained the third largest channel in the marketplace, obviously very dominated by digital there on the left. These are the latest figures from WARC. But again, people think about TV and outdoor. Mail has been little hidden as that third channel, and JICMail data has provided Mail the essential ingredients and industry standard audience data for the planning of the channel. So, I think we recognise we're playing an important role for actually a very substantial channel that often doesn't get the credit it deserves. Thank you, Mark. And I kind of realise that most of you will know about JICMail, but for a few that don't, just again, the headlines, just to remember that JICMail is basically the jointly industry-owned currency for Mail. So we are actually owned by the industry. We're not for profit. Obviously, we represent the sales side, such as Whistle, who sit on our board. Mark sits on our board, but we also represent advertisers and agencies. So we are, in that sense, neutral and here to represent everyone. And we deliver objective, impartial data that is accepted for the planning of budgets across the industry. Importantly, since the spring of last year, there was an onset of the JICMail levy, which is a fractional charge and applied to your cost of ad mail. And that means that actually data access is open and free to everyone. So anyone on this call who who works in an organization in the mail industry and hasn't got access to JICMail, do contact it afterwards, because you can access it at no cost, and we will train you to get you going on the data. Very pleased very recently, in fact, just end of last week, to announce the latest round of JICMail Platinum partners that sort of follow on the heels of Whistle and join the dots who are already Platinum partners. And they're really, it's great to be able to do that, because that's basically practitioners who are setting best practice across the industry in their use of JICMail data. So we make those awards twice a year. And again, if that's new to you and you're in a JICMail subscriber, go for Platinum in October. I won't spend too much time going through the actual methodology, but the third point there is just a reminder that we are panel-based. So this is a very tightly quality-controlled, defined and managed panel run by Kantar of 1,000 households, just over 2,000 people who are capturing via the app what happens to the items of mail that come into the household over the course of the month. And since we've been capturing this data since the beginning of 2017, we've now got the world's largest capture of mail item journeys, so 230,000. And we're just about to announce we release the data every quarter, and we're just about to announce the Q1 results for the beginning of this year. So that's a real kind of overview. There's plenty more on the website if you want to understand that methodology a bit more. Dig into. There's an excellent video on the website that will explain that to you. Thank you, Mark. So over the next 20 minutes, just under. And I should say that given the onset of the levy, that's really opened up access to this data. So we are across all industry sectors. So we have about 160. Subscribers to our data, but advertisers, specialist agencies, mainstream agencies, we're across the whole ecosystem, which is absolutely where we want to be. And we will continually kind of look to drive uptake of this data across all aspects of the industry. It's there for everyone to use and to drive value to their business. So the levies work really well for us. We really appreciate the industry support for this data set. And long may it continue. Thanks, Mark. So bit of a tease to start with. The basic output of the panel are these mail items, a mail item journey, which just basically captures this picture of what happens to a particular mail item in a particular household. And this is an example of actually quite a strong door drop journey. And kind of slight tease given the theme of the webinar. You can see here that this particular item arrived on November the 1st. It was immediately opened, read and put aside. So those physical actions are coded in blue and basically defining the number of interactions that your audiences get to these items as they come into your home. It was actually left for 3 weeks in this case and returned to by the same person on Saturday, the 20th of November. And you can see then how they owned it again. They did recycle it, but then they went online. So in red, we now get these kind of commercial actions, these secondary actions. And in this case, went online, visited the sender's website, and then talked about it with someone else in the household. So this is a pretty strong mail journey that captures actually how exposure and interaction lasts with mail across the course of the month, and also drives these commercial actions, these actions in red. And lo and behold, thank you, Mark, I can reveal this one was for Oddbox, which will be interesting to Hannah. So each respondent captures a picture of the mail item that comes in their door. So they're not perfect pictures, but the panelists take them. And obviously we've got lots of data on both the item itself and the household. And in this case, you can see some of our core metrics here. This item, as we saw in that mail journey, reached 2 people in the household, and the physical blue actions there were 6 interactions, which we call frequency, and then the secondary commercial actions going down that journey funnel, the customer journey funnel, a further 3 actions. So that one item, item actually triggered 6 interactions and 3 further commercial actions. And that essentially is the building blocks of the data. So just for the rest of the time, I'm just going to go through some of the door drop key trends over the last, as I say, sort of recent times, both in terms of volume, in terms of effectiveness, and also dig into some of these audience trends. And all the while trying to highlight and bring out the shift in patterns that we've seen through the JICMail data, both in terms of the online patterns, but also how they drive these online behaviors as well. So that will be a constant theme. So first one up, thank you, Mark. So this is just the headline numbers in terms of volumes as captured by our panel. So it's a proxy for volumes. We're not saying this is actual market volumes, but obviously it's a good indicator. And you can see that in the last, in terms of 2021, and at the back end of 2021 as well, really strong uplifts and recovery in door drop volumes to that pre-pandemic levels, above those levels. So you can see we've been capturing these volumes since 2017, and door drops rebounding strongly on an upward trend. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, and you can see then in terms of how door drops, their share of mail, which obviously we're looking across door drops here. We're looking at door drops here, but we also capture direct mail and business mail. And as a proportion, you can see there that the share has actually gone up as well. In 2020, it was 20% share of total mail volumes, now up to 23%. Thank you, Mark. And some of the categories, obviously we're capturing, you can aggregate all these mail items in all sorts of ways in our data, look at the categories and so on. And the categories driving that growth and uptick are those 6 on the right. And of course, mail order and online retail is one of those. You can see growing year on year there, 90% up, just under. So really strong rebound in mail order. Thanks, Mark. And again, you can dig into your JICMail data and cut it in all sorts of ways. And even within the online retail category, there's lots of obviously different advertiser types within that, be that fashion, books, food, and of course Amazon. And this is just one snapshot of actually you can look at the profile of the audiences they're targeting. And in this case, you can just see the age profile, and on the left there, how the book people have been targeting, right to the right with YouGarden. And again, it's just a good way to dig into the data. Someone like Amazon, for example, they're in the middle, actually going younger than some of the other online retailers. And Oddbox, from our data, Hannah, it shows that actually you've got a reasonable spread, and indeed you are looking to target some households with young people in it as well. You can look at this in terms of geodemographics, in terms of standard demographics, and so on. So you can look at it for yourself and for your competitors. Thank you, Mark. And the final thing in terms of, just wanted to flag one of the integrations you get with JICMail. If you're if you subscribe to Kantar's TGI survey, then we've integrated JICMail data into TGI. So you get the best of both worlds there. So you can look at all the kind of audience cuts, live media and lifestyle questions on TGI, and look at the media, look at the mail behaviors according to Jikmail as well. So this is looking at e-commerce clusters, the segmentation that is available on TGI, and you can see the different types of buyers there, from savvy browsers, impulse buyers, unassuming shoppers, and so on. So you can, in TGI, obviously analyze all sorts of aspects of those audiences. With the integration, you can also then look to see how they're using door drops. So thank you, Mark. And in this case, across 3 of these categories, questions around interest in offers, vouchers, and promotions when they're looking at their mail, a really strong kind of uptick for some of those groups. So against the UK population, there, almost 1.5 times the bargain hunters more likely to respond to vouchers and promotions and offers and so on. So again, you can begin to dig into that profile a bit deeper. Thank you, Mark. That's the one. And you can then look at some of the online behaviours. So for 2 of those 3 clusters, impulse buyers and bargain hunters, you can see almost twice as likely for bargain hunters to actually then go online as a result of looking through their mail. So again, just by looking at the data sources, Jikmail data, and some of the other sources we've got this data integrated into, it opens a whole load of insights about some of these kind of trends and behaviours. Thank you, Mark. So then just thinking about effectiveness trends within that, you'll see within the, you remember in that mail journey, those red actions are classified as commercial actions. And so just digging into the anatomy of door drops beyond the kind of baseline of if you like, frequency and volumes. Here you can see at the bottom line here in this chart is looking at the conventional response rate. So generally for door drops across all panelists over time, you can see those who are claiming to have responded to their door drops in red directly, but you can then look at these other behaviours in red, as in those commercial actions, and look at the full picture of what's really happening. So be it purchase rates in purple there, these online effects, and even those, aggregating together all those brand discussions in the home, which are obviously incredibly valuable. And you can see the full picture, and you can see the uptick in the in COVID, in Q2, and Q3, Q1 and Q2 of 2020, that big uplift in total effects, total commercial actions from door drops. And it's been maintained. So in that sense, that uptick has created a new level since those lockdown eras of commercial effectiveness, commercial actions from door drops, according to Jikmail. Thank you, Mark. And then here we're just summarising that to just look at those on the left-hand side there, these commercial actions, and you can see that across the piece in 2021. The conversion from exposure to effectiveness, and particularly some of those digital actions, grew by 50% in that year, in last year. So, purchase rates overall really healthy year on year. You can see that in the top there, and in the middle you can see the growing digital impact, whilst at the same time, and importantly, the physical effects of door drops still being maintained. So another way of looking at in trend terms is beginning to look at the sort of year-on-year growth of some of these digital actions. So against that blue line of frequency, these are year-on-year growth pictures. So you see the kind of uptick in 2020, the conversions to kind of digital actions is higher again. So it means that the digital actions are outstripping, converting better from frequency of exposure to actual these important digital outcomes. Thank you, Mark. And you can see that pattern over the quarters. So if you look back there on the right-hand side of that is the intricate patterns of going online and also going in store from door drops, as we've captured. So that first lockdown period, shaded in light blue there, you can see the big uplift, and it ebbs and flows across the year. And you can see the actual commercial actions were quite responsive to those lockdown patterns, lifting to a new normal for going online. But even in that dark blue, in the purple, you can see going back in store when lockdown actually ends as well. So you know, I think these are sort of fundamental behaviours that Jikmail is capturing here for the marketplace, and you know, there's kind of the double benefit of increased conversion to digital plus strong rebound in kind of footfall, creating this picture of improved effectiveness and door drops in the last 12 months or so. Thank you, Mark. And you know, I think there's other ways you can look at it. One of the interesting insights here from this recent time is the actual extent to which smartphones are driving digital actions. You know, the volume of digital actions coming from your smartphone versus people calling the advertiser and helplines and so on has now kind of flipped. So you can see it's now more significant that people respond via their smartphone than to call centres. We've seen that in other forms of mail as well. So if you like, there's been a new tipping point in fulfilment as captured by Jikmail. Thank you, Mark. So just then finally in some of these audience trends. So we've been looking at these commercial actions, these red kind of elements of those mail journeys. The blue elements, those physical interactions, are really the kind of these audience trends. So this is again just looking at the full anatomy, the full impact of what you get from your mail, which starts with your volumes in the dark red there. This is looking at a typical 1 million door drop distribution. So over time, 1 million volume is clearly the same, but you overlay the reach in the household, as we saw with that original mail journey, where it gets interacted with someone else in the household. You're reaching more than one person with that volume, with that item. And then importantly, then you add together all those other impressions, or that opening, putting to one side and so forth. And you see that 1 million door drops generate over 3 million impressions. So that's one of the kind of core fundamentals of Jikmail, is that impression data is the data that all other channels are using with their currencies. So be it TV, be it kind of digital and so on. So we've got this comparable data. So don't use volumes to understand how mails are working. Use Jikmail to overlay the full anatomy, both in terms of frequency and, of course, as you saw just a few moments ago, all those patterns of commercial actions as well. So yeah, thank you, Mark. And again, some interesting little nuggets in terms of recent trends. So this is just looking at the profile of door drops, about which audiences engage by the most with door drops in terms of frequency. And you can see back in 2018, more C2DE, so they interacted with their door drops much more frequently, or slightly more frequently, I should say, than ABC ones, but that has flipped over. So ABC ones interact with door drops more than C2DEs, and that's a recent phenomenon, which again which might surprise a few people. Thank you, Mark. And same as younger audiences, often ignored by advertisers, and actually that's a missed opportunity. And remarkably, again, in the last 12 months, younger audiences interact with their door drops more than older audiences. And again, that's completely against the perceived norm. So you can see the line there of 55 pluses in green, all pretty stable, actually has lifted and above where it was. But look at the interaction rates of the under 35s. So a big shift from 2018 to 2021. So yeah, I think that's a kind of big takeout from some of these trends. Thank you, Mark. And again, there is so much in this data for you to look at. You'll have your own particular targeting priorities. So this is just looking at Acorn groups. And again, you can do the year-on-year comparisons, and you can see in overall terms, some of the attractive, we're saying that ABC ones are interacting more. Well, that feeds through to the Acorn groups here around rising prosperity, comfortable communities, and affluent achievers, increasing their engagement levels with door drops, which again is a strong story, I think. Thank you, Mark. And final thing in the time available is just to hopefully we've illustrated some significant change, some core new trends, some new dynamics around the kind of full journeys with mail, And so, we've been spending quite a bit of time at JICMEL to encourage you to test some of the hypotheses behind some of these trends in a test and learn approach. So, we're not trying to suggest that to teach people how to test and learn, but we do say reference some of these core insights and actually put them into your test and learn feedback loop. Start with the hypothesis, make it more obviously customized and relevant to your particular challenge, and begin to use some of the benchmarks in JICMEL to evaluate whether that's working or not. So just to help that sort of theory, if you like, we have got a little package of research support, thank you, Mark, to help you with that. So we pulled together a mixed variety of ways in which you can build out your evaluation approach using JICMEL data. We've linked up, for example, with a Scandinavian creative testing company called RAM, who are well established in certainly in digital markets, to pre-test your creative work at a low cost, using again some of the questions we're asking of our panelists on their, albeit online panel, but that's quite a low cost. So if you wanted to pre-test what's going to be the likely interaction rates with this creative approach, and again, if you're using JICMEL benchmarks for looking at that, there's a really sort of a cost-effective way of some creative testing there. We're talking about, in that sense, a few £100, should we say, per item. Then there's some bigger brand impact evaluation that, again, Kantar's our main research contractor. They have a brand impact approach, so you can integrate JICMEL, your mail data, into that brand impact approach in a mixed methodology, and again get a robust read of whether your campaign's working or not. Then the third option there, which is worth just dwelling on for the sort of slightly kind of main campaigns of the year, we created an option for Kantar to seed our panel with your particular creative work and boost it, so that we make sure that, let's say that you get a test and control sample from our 1,000 panel, and then you'll get your absolute comparison of the metrics from our panel. And of course, we'll remove that data from our published data, but that's a new option. It does carry a cost because obviously, our research contractor, in order to boost the panel and capture and report on that data, there is a cost for that. But again, that is we have an advertiser testing that in the next month. So keen to find more, again, interest in that one in particular. And then if you really want a full end-to-end, if you're typically lots of advertisers invested in the Kantar Wool panel, which is the consumption panel of tracking of absolute audit of, if you like, the full journey. Then there's an option to connect JICMEL data into their Wool panel data as well. So there's quite a lot there, but there's more on the website. There's a presentation that explains these tracking options, but just reach out to us. The important thing is, I think there's some really fundamental trends that are now emerging. The online-offline relationship, really kind of interesting use of mail by e-commerce advertisers that we're capturing as well. Please do take a look and pick up with us as you see fit. Thank you. And that's it. So that's the big takeout. Sorry. So volumes have rebounded strongly. We've illustrated hopefully that digital actions are working harder than ever from door drops. And I think that's a really strong takeout on younger upmarket audiences are now the most engaged audiences with door drops. So we'll leave you with that. Thank you, Mark.
Excellent, Mark. Thank you so much for taking us through that. And as I say, you'll have copies of these slides and the video, but the contact details are here as well. So don't hesitate to reach out if you're interested in learning more about perhaps what your brand can learn from JICMEL. Right, so now again, my pleasure to introduce James, who's the founder of Paper and Pixels, and I will pass the mic over to him.
Hi there. Can you see me and hear me?
Perfectly, thank you. Good.
Great. So Mark, I'm going to have to give you the nod on the slides, obviously, and I'll work through as steadily as I can. So I'm founder of Paper and Pixels, and we specialize in basically direct response creative. And I wanted to talk to you today about principles of offline advertising that drives online sales. So next slide, please, Mark. And the reason why we feel qualified to do that is because we've been producing offline advertising for over 20 years now. And during this time, this would be in press inserts, direct mail, door drops, anything within the offline arena, really. And we've learned through this time about our successes and failures in various A/B splits. And various scenarios where we're constantly learning, and we're very much around that. You know, we creatives can be quite a subjective subject, but really the only thing that really gives us evidence is in the test and in the proof of the results that our creative produces. So we feel like that sort of treasure chest of learnings is super valuable, and that's why you know it's the science of learning essentially that sort of heads. We utilize that experience to produce our next creative project. So next slide, please, Mark. So just quick overview of some clients that we've worked for. The one thing I'd say about, albeit this is quite a wide sort of spread there, they've all got one thing in common, and why they come to us is that they've all got something to sell, essentially, and they're looking for their advertising to have a direct reaction. And that's the sort of common thread through everyone that we work for. Next slide, please, Mark. And then just to delve a bit deeper into those clients, some of those clients. So it's a real sort of mix in terms of where we work. And I think that's important because clues in our name, it's Paper and Pixels, and the creative, you know, if the hard work is happening in the offline acquisition, we need to make sure that the online journey is consistent, and the customer coming from an offline piece of marketing feels looked after, so we can, you know, maximize on conversions. Next slide, please. So just quickly, just to sort of champion offline in terms of a channel and how hard it can work, I've got a few examples of companies that have very much utilized that channel. The first one is a company called Fine Art Warehouse. Next slide, please, Mark. And the reason why I can talk fairly freely about this one is that it's actually a company that I started and founded in 2019. And the reason I did this, one of the main reasons, was that I really wanted to understand e-commerce from my client side. But also I wanted to I felt quite strongly that we could prove the offline model. And from a standing start, this business was literally produced, customers were acquired via offline channels, predominantly to begin with in press advertising and magazine advertising. Literally no Facebook advertising to begin with, or very little Google. It was really built on newspaper ads, and so we had a pretty decent year to begin with. We acquired over 9,000 customers and had a decent turnover. But the main point here is that from a standing start, it was offline acquisition that started the business, and still very much part of it. Next slide, please, Mark. So from a client point of view, again, from a standing start, Bookhound is a flourishing company now into their third year. Onto the next slide. And again, they're not, in their first 6 months, 90% of their spend was in offline media. And again, predominantly to begin with was press advertising, but they're now very much into direct mail, into inserts. And as they carry on, they've grown to have over 60,000 customers after 2 years. These are all notes from our client. And I would say he says 50% of it is still from offline recruitment. So even though they're very much have a digital channels and then utilizing that offline still plays a major role. And I guess what we're saying is, you know, if the fit is right, offline can be a super efficient and super effective channel to enter into the mix. The last example, next slide, please, Mark. This was a client that were only in online when we met them. They were very much entrenched in Facebook advertising and Google. they felt that their customer demographic was 35 to 50 plus, 35 to 50 females. And when I met them, I felt that it could well be broader than that. So the conversation to begin with, because they're both young entrepreneurs, very much knew the digital space brilliantly. But when I asked them this question, so which newspapers do you think best suit your audience demographic? Alex, who my client is, he really struggled to answer one because he just wasn't aware of even, you know, what different types of newspapers there was. He was so that far removed from that channel. It was, you know, there's a bit of education that went on there, so we found the best media for him, and we went about the creative. And next slide, please, Mark. The first foray into newsprint was in, I believe, the Times newspaper and the Eye, and he got really decent CPAs. Moving on from that, next slide. He now it's offline's become a really significant channel for them, because it's proven that beyond their Facebook audience, there's a whole nother audience that he, you know, wasn't necessarily aware of, that he's opened up, and now offline advertising has become a major channel for him. But also we're now looking at direct mail and inserts, because, you know, we know from what we can see from the results in advertising that there's definitely scope for other offline channels, and so that he's now benefiting from that whole mix of digital and offline as a combination. So that's that. Next slide, please. So that's just a bit around the offline as a channel. But so how do we make offline advertising work as hard as it possibly can? And this is where we come into sort of principles around persuasion, but also sort of human behaviors and behavior biases. So next slide. So how do we do that? Well, really the content and the information around this is already out there. You know, there's plenty of books and information around it. I guess what we do is just read a lot of them, and we really try and research into the subject matter and learn more and more about principles and behavior biases, because across all marketing, this is the thing that can be the difference. So we try and entrench ourselves in this as much as possible. Next slide. So within our studio, if we were starting on a piece of creative work, we have this saying within the studio that goes something like, on the next slide, don't be you. And what we mean by that is that it's a really common thing to happen when you're producing creative, that you make some decision based on what you're thinking in your own head. It's human nature, we can't help it. It's one of the things I sort of drum into all of our creatives when they join us, is that, you know, really got to entrench yourself into your audience, because that's who's reading your advert. They're not just looking at it, they're reading it. And I think the most important thing that we do internally as a business is that we try and pitch to someone within that demographic, someone that we know. So if it's a 60+ male, we try and pitch to someone that we know in that demographic and write to them, because that just really helps you get in the zone. And it's, you know, I would say it's the most often thing we push back on clients with. Sometimes if we feel like an instruction is coming that's based on their thoughts rather than necessarily their customers, then we kind of remind them of how important it is to make sure we're resonating with them. So next slide, please. So beyond that sort of frame of mind, we then have what we call our 6 principles checklist. This is on stuff that is out there, and you're going to know some of it. But I guess the point is that it's a checklist. It's something to benchmark against, because again, creative is a wide subject. It's very subjective, but, you know, we feel like there should be rules to it to get the best out of it in terms of a response. So if we go to the next slide. So these would be the 6 principles that we would kind of check that we're including, or at least, if not all of them, most of them. So the first one would be likable principle. So that's, you know, tone of voice. Is our copy warm? Is it trustworthy? Are people likely to warm to it? How does it read? Is it friendly? So that's that one. Authority, we know works well, but this is essentially making sure that everything that we're saying is, you know, can it be backed up? Is there an external expert that can back up what we're saying? Is there an internal expert that can back up what we're saying? But can the benefits of our product come from as well as the company, is from someone in a position of authority, because it carries more weight that way. The contrast principle is around, if we are selling a single product, can we upsell other products to push up our AOV? You know, websites work in this way, and print should do too. So if we've got an advert, a piece of marketing that's championing our hero product, are we utilizing that opportunity to upsell lower cost items that complement the hero? And the reason why the contrast principle works, because if the audience is already warmed up to buying the hero product, that the sort of push to get them to purchase something of much lower value is so much easier, because they're already sort of in the zone of buying the higher price version. So by pure contrast, the lower cost item is an easy sell. Social proof, we all know about. What we would say about that is that with testimonials, make sure they're specific. We see loads of times of just generalized testimonials that are not working as hard as something that's very particular to the advert and the message that we're sending. So take time on choosing the best ones, and don't make them too long, but also don't make them too short. Make them very specific, and work hard for your message. The reciprocation principle is, we've used in Hare Krishna here as an example. The reason being is that their sort of whole marketing model is based on stopping people on the street, and it wasn't, you know, a big breakthrough for them was when they started giving people either some flowers or a free book, something like that. The very nature, the behavioral bias, the behavior or the of humans is when they receive something there of in a gift type method, that they then feel obliged to pay attention and to reciprocate that. And so that's, you know, something that you can think about how you can use in your marketing. The last one is the scarcity principle, something that we all know about, but just as an example, if we go to the next slide, is where we can kind of take these principles a little bit further and see how we can combine them. So this, we all know that scarcity principle is a limit on time or a limit on quantity, but what we're saying is make sure you give reason why that is the case. So this is a really well-known example. So it's called the cookie experiment. It's from 1975. So there's a jar of 10 and a jar of just 2 cookies were taste tested by the participants. It's important to note that the cookies are exactly the same. The result in this initial test is that the cookies in scarce supply were rated as significantly more delicious, and the participants were prepared to pay 11% more for them. But importantly, one group of participants were told that the jar containing only 2 cookies were in such scarce supply because they had proved to be unexpectedly popular because they were so tasty. So in this scenario, the cookies were rated highest of all, and participants were willing to pay a massive 43% more than they were for the exact same cookies in plentiful supply. So this is combining social proof and scarcity. So we're going, right, well, we know scarcity works, but if we give the reason why it's scarce, a very good reason, in this case using social proof, then that works even harder. If we go on to the next slide. Thank you. So something that's not often used, but it can be super effective, is if you put a limit on sales. So this is from a test in the US supermarket. It was a discount on Campbell's soups. The discount was the same in all versions, but the difference being that in the control, there was no limit on purchase. You could purchase as many cans as you wanted, but in the test, you were limited. In the test, you were limited to 12 cans. And interestingly, the results from the control was literally no limit on purchase. The average order was 3.3 cans, but where you were limited to 12 cans, the limit was 7. The average order was 7 cans. So that's a massive uplift of over 100%. So this is combining scarcity, but also something called anchoring, where we're setting the parameters of the purchase. And again, this can be a super effective winning combination. So just moving on. So moving on for offline, one of the most important things, and in the words of David Ogilvy, on average 5 times as many people read the headline as they read the body copy. So obviously headlines are super important in any offline activity. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Mark. So we're just going to share 4 qualities that we think make an effective headline. So most importantly, one is that the the headline contains self-interest. You know, let's show the benefit and the value to the reader early on, because essentially when we're all humans and we all know what's in it for us. Another really useful technique is in the way of making it newsworthy. So quite often offline advertising can be in a place where something's being read, or even if it's not, we find that this is super effective. So we say, give your headline an announcement quality, make it newsworthy. There's plenty of ways of doing that, just from the very words or the way the headline is worded, but also using sort of introductory words like announcing, finally, discover, at last. It just helps grab people's attention. Next slide, please. Asking a question is a really good, effective way of using a headline. So because essentially the very nature of a question makes the reader feel like they're being spoken directly to. So that's a really effective way of getting people to stop and read. And the last one we really like is creating curiosity, or even better, starting a story that you want to read on and find out more about. Moving on to the next slide. This is a classic that's been used across years by the advertising greats. We've used some classics here that you may have not seen before. But when you read something like, they laughed when I sat down at the piano, but when I started to play ... or at 60 miles an hour, the loudest noise in the new Rolls Royce came from the electric clock. It creates that essence of, I want to know how the story continues, you know, and it's that sort of essence of creating a headline that makes people want to read more. So next slide, please. So that's kind of talking about how you can make your creative more effective. I'm just going to talk about a few real life examples where you can see the uplift that well thought out creative can produce. So next slide, please. Just a caveat to this. So a lot of the examples we've used here are press advertising. The main reason being is that we get really clean results from A/B splits in national press and magazines. And it's just a really good way to utilize, to illustrate the effectiveness of creative, because essentially that's the only difference between everything that we're showing you here. So in this advert for Parsybox, the client of ours, the only difference is creative. The offer is the same, the images are the same. Everything to do with it is the same. It's just the presentation. So if we look at the ad on the left, it's leading with the brand that no one at this point really knew. The headlines are muddled. Then there's no sort of hierarchy between them. The images are a little bit small. The call to action is massive, but it doesn't have hierarchy. So what we're trying to do is just go, right, well, what's the benefit here? It's £1.99 a mil for starters. Let's tell people about that. Let's get the images up nice and big. Let's take the customer on a journey. Let's make sure that all the benefits really sort of pop off the page. And in addition, on this particular occasion, we also knew that the demographic quite often might respond by postal coupon, so we make sure that was included. And it's a combination of all these factors that can make a big difference. So next slide, please. Just some inserts into mailed membership magazines for RSPB. Again, same offer, same content, but just a different way of presenting it produced really significant uplift. Next slide, please. This one we like because actually the ad on the left appears quite nice, friendly, but in reality the headline doesn't really offer much. It's cute, but it doesn't really shout benefit. The text is also really hard to read. It's a bit of a no-no to have white text on a dark background, especially in newsprint. So again, what we're doing is it's quite simple, really. It's giving the headline an announcement quality, but also getting the benefit across quickly, and then making the copy easy to read and to give it a natural flow through to the call to action, and also the prominence of things like testimonials and Trustpilot and all that sort of stuff. Next slide, please. This is just a quick sample that we worked on for Body Shop. Main one being here is that what we introduced here was the interactivity of a voucher that was connected to the letter. And by doing that, because the voucher was on the letter and not separated, we could also personalize it. And it's a combination of a really well written letter combined with an insert that carries the offer through. It can just be super effective and achieve really decent response rates. Next slide, please. And then just going into a bit more detail, and this is the granular way that we can work. So this is a run of 3 ads in the Daily Telegraph, A/B splits, just to prove that the creative 100% was more effective. So if we go to the next slide, albeit they look very similar, the adverts on face value, when we actually break it down, there's sort of 12 areas that we looked at in more detail and affected. So it's things like placement of offer, headline that leads into copy, bringing the benefit out, the body copy, size of imagery, placement of testimonials, urgency around the call to action, authority around the call to action. All of these elements, it's like the compound factor of all these elements can make the difference. So it's really important to consider all of the granular detail, because once you get it right, you've then got an advert that's working and you can repeat it. Next slide, please. And importantly, what I'm on repeating any type of creative in any channel is that over time it will tire, however successful it was in the first place. So what we're saying here is essentially take the success of your first creative that is doing really well, but make sure that you've got new creative lined up and you're thinking ahead, because essentially when things start to tire, just by introducing new creative, you will produce an uplift as long as it's based on the same principles of the original winning advert. Next slide, please. And the last thing on offline to online, I touched on at the start of the presentation, is that consistency is super important. You can have an offline piece of creative that works really well and recruits a bunch of customers, but where are they going? Are they going to a call center? Or are they going to online? And if they are going online, what does that journey look like? Is it consistent? Does the customer feel like they're being looked after? Does the offer run through? How does that work? Because the worst thing is to have a really effective piece of offline acquisition that then doesn't convert online because that journey isn't fluid enough. Next slide, please. So hopefully you're convinced or it's given a decent amount of information around why offline can be a really effective channel and what makes really effective creative. And if you're already working or already producing offline marketing, why would you invest in specialist creative? And I guess that in the next slide, I think illustrates this quite well, is that offline has various costs within it. Quite often creative is quite a small fraction of that cost. When you consider the other things that are going on, like print, postage, and media. And I guess what we're saying here is that creative can often be the one of the things that can make the biggest difference, because it's the one thing that you can that has variables within it. So it's really can be super effective. But also, the creative that you get produced is then that's yours to use again, and you can have variants of it. So it's something that we think is totally worth the investment. It can be reutilized, reversioned, and it can be the one thing that can really make a campaign sing. And next slide. Oh, I think that's it. Just some very examples of print examples. And then next slide is just if there's anything you'd want to talk about more, then please do so. And that's it. Thank you.
Excellent. James, thank you so much for that. There was some great insights there, very easy to digest, and some brilliant takeouts for people. So absolutely wonderful, really good creative overview. Thank you so much for that.
Welcome.
It is now my turn, I think, to take you on the next step of the journey, and this is really around the planning piece, and in particular what's sort of happening in DoorDrop at the moment, so that we can obviously sort of support the creative efforts with the planning and the targeting piece as well. So just very quickly about us, we are Royal Mail's largest DoorDrop customer. We're market leaders in DoorDrop media. We are well known, of course, for other things as well as Whistle, but our specialism is DoorDrop. It's actually where our business started. We deliver print items and also samples, an offering that's recently been added to by the acquisition of Relish, a sampling agency that delivers inside e-commerce packages. And as Mark indicated at the start of this presentation, we're also a founder member of JICMail, which is very much for the industry and to help it grow. So I'm going to talk a little bit about planning and targeting, but I'm also going to talk a bit about measurement and the attribution gap. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this, and you can look at it as sort of seasoned and responsible marketeers and smile and laugh and think, surely nobody would ever be that stupid. But of course, last click attribution is unfortunately the still the default for many advertisers, and clearly it has enabled digital marketing to grow quite rich off the response that all other channels have been nurturing and developing that interest before the final, obviously, execution takes place, arguably through a smartphone, a tablet, or a laptop at the moment. Right, so there's the challenge, shall we say, about how we mind the attribution gap. And, to distill that thinking, we're using one of the preeminent sort of commentators on marketing effectiveness, Peter Field, who has a nice pithy quote, which I obviously use a lot because of the words he uses: overhyped and oversold on a uniquely digital future. So we need to get real, which is where I think we come in, and take a more evidence-based view of what really drives effectiveness. My paraphrase on this, though, is just because your business is 100% digital, it certainly doesn't mean your consumers or your marketing should be. And I think we've already seen in the previous presentation how multi-channel is actually a more effective route to deliver what you want for your organization. So just a few observations, because we're in a time of great flux. We're coming out of a pandemic. We've still got global supply chain pressures, and there's a lot of regulatory change afoot. And one of the things that we point to quite regularly is that DoorDrop, which uses anonymized data in the targeting that is focused on households rather than individual people, is a compliant acquisition channel. So we're a compliant way to grow your business at scale. And when you contrast that with obviously what the next few years are going to look like in the digital marketing sphere, again, back to Mark's slides, and you see how dominant that has become. Arguably, a part of that growth has been about its effectiveness, but another part of that growth has obviously also been about the fact that it's been a largely unregulated space. And some of the things that happen today tread perilously close to that thin line between creepy and clever. And that is, of course, creating mounting pressure on these organizations and the tech giants that sit behind the majority of that advertising spend. It's got governments and regulators interested, and it has also engineered change from within. So internal pressures perhaps ahead of external regulation to try to address some of those sort of challenges. And just to sort of play with some of those key ones that are obviously very topical at the moment. Earlier this year, the Belgian Data Protection Agency actually ruled the IAB's consent and transparency and consent framework to be illegal as a direct contravention of GDPR. So, they've actually been fined €250,000, and they've been given 6 months to take corrective action. There's an appeal in play, to be fair, but I think this is something that our ICO here in the UK was already looking at in terms of the ad tech, and they've done quite a lot of saber rattling before the pandemic, but not really taken much action. Well, the Belgians did, and there are going to be some consequences from that. Google, of course, is degrading the cookies, third-party cookies in particular, and is desperately scrambling to try to come up with a new iteration, something else that they can take its place for. But third-party cookies is arguably the fossil fuel that still powers a lot of our digital marketing economy at the moment, particularly obviously in terms of the real-time bidding and the programmatic space. And I'd say that is imperiled by some of the changes, the privacy first changes that are coming forward. And on the subject of privacy first, that's very much a leading mantle to Apple, who are using it to devastating effect at the moment in a bit of a battle with Meta, and you may well have seen that spill over into above the line media if you've caught the Apple's latest ad, the data auction ad, which I think is an excellent piece of creative, and as this ad, as commentators mentions, is only scary because it's unfortunately so true about the way our data is hawked around the wild west of the internet by people we do not know and definitely have not given consent to. Another attribute I just wanted to call out while we're here is actually around sustainability. Something that's very close to our hearts. We've been members of the Two Sides organisation since 2012. We have signed up to support AdNet Zero, as by the way have joined the dots. And we're also ISO 14001 compliant. And the exciting developments in that space is that already carbon positive print is here and now. And there is obviously a lot of movement within Royal Mail to start offering carbon balance distribution. So you can actually offset your campaign. So by the end of 2022, it will be perfectly possible and way ahead of at the AdNet Zero deadline of 2030 to provide a completely balanced, carbon balanced door drop campaign from production through to end distribution. And that will move the dial quite a lot, because that will move door drop and also mail and partially addressed mail into a space that a lot of other marketing channels are still trying to catch up on. And interestingly, this some data and some insight from Unifeeder, who've launched one of many carbon calculators in the marketplace, but in particular, this one is obviously looking comparatively between media. And what you can sort of see here in the chart, the dark grey is the cost per sale. So there's a comparative measure of the cost per sale. And you can see obviously how efficient on that metric email is, for example, and actually digital a little bit less than print, but compared to other wider offline channels. But when you start looking at the kilograms of carbon per sale, then actually a very different picture emerges in terms of actually where the most efficiency lies. And this is something that's feeding through as one of the initiatives from AdNet Zero, is in fact using carbon as one of the metrics, not the only one, but perhaps one of the metrics that you might use in your media planning tools. So you might choose campaigns based on their ability to be carbon balanced. Perhaps those factors, and of course what we've seen already from Jigmail, are helping to make door drop come back in quite a kind of solid bounce from the pandemic. I mean, no doubt about it, 2020, especially the first lockdown, was a pretty devastating time across all marketing disciplines, it must be said, even digital. But the bounce back has been very strong since the second half of that year and throughout 2021. And we've seen, say, very significant growth in volumes, but which is both a factor of existing customers coming back, but also a lot of brand new customers, which I'll come on to explain in a minute. So the boom really has been seen across almost all categories, some a little slower than others, but echoing again what Mark had indicated in his Jigmail analysis. And also this trait of actually attracting younger audiences, which is very interesting. Definitely kind of counterintuitive when people consider door drop is normally a channel for the grey market only. Well, I think this is definitely evidence to support the contrary view. And of course, advertisers are increasingly using technology to connect the offline and online world. And I suppose if anything had a good pandemic, it was very much the QR code, which suddenly went from sort of zero to hero. And everybody now is, globally really is fully educated on exactly what you do with that rather strange and perplexing kind of collection of dots and white spaces. So having kind of nobilized that and enabled the use of that, we're very excited to start seeing this appear on creative. It always had the opportunity, but historically never really landed, partly because of the technological barriers, and also because people just weren't thinking through the customer journey. So again, to James's point, in terms of obviously thinking all the way through from your print execution to your online and making the customer journey as easy as possible. There's many things a QR card can do, but like all marketing, it has to be useful, has to be relevant to make it worthwhile. And just some insight that comes out of one of our charity clients, actually, Movember, targeting a younger demographic again. So again, proof point around the different audiences that door drop can reach. Interesting sort of analysis. While the response for QR was not the biggest part of the overall response file, what we did notice was that actually it did have a better conversion rate. So it effectively seemed to be a more committed journey. Once you embarked on it, once you'd scanned that QR code, you were far more likely to donate to the cause off the back of it, which I find a very interesting insight, which is being kind of repeated by more use from other clients. But yes, as I say, 2020 and 21, turbulent years, no doubt, but years in which an awful lot of online brands began to see the opportunity of an audience stuck at home increasingly, and also saw the opportunity to interrupt people on the journey and drive these efficient digital interactions that Mark was telling us about at the start. So just a selection from the marketplace of online brands who came into print or were using DoorDrop as part of their marketing mix. And again, similar to James's point just now, not something that you arrive and land on first time all right. You've got to test your creative, you've got to test your targeting approach, you've got to go through it. There is a rigor to this, and the results come in time. The key thing is not to do it once and walk away. You've got to get all of your elements right, including indeed your attribution, making sure that you are measuring effectively. DoorDrop is a very granular channel dealing with postcodes. There's good data capture, particularly obviously relevant for e-commerce, where there's excellent data capture because the product's normally delivered. We can normally demonstrate, clear attribution and then test and learn and iterate as to how you get that campaign to rise up through your hierarchy and deliver, some fantastic returns on investment or compelling cost per responses. And that's our job in life, really, is to take you on that journey, to take your brief, to help you with your audience discovery, to put it in plan alongside your other media, to deliver the campaign on the ground, and then to learn from it and use those learnings to improve them, so the next campaign is better than the last because of what you've learned along the way. And we use a variety of anonymized data sets, so all compliant data, anonymized postcode level data, which enables us to basically paint great pictures. And wherever geography matters, the fact is that DoorDrop probably has an opportunity to drive that, whether it's a retail catchment or indeed an online catchment, which perhaps is a concept you may not sort of gel with. But let me explain a little bit more about that in a second. One of the things about DoorDrop is it enables you to define your own audience, okay, and then locate it, okay. So geodemographics, which is what a tool like Mosaic or Acorn do exactly that. They define your audience and then geolocate them, okay. Not anybody else's audience, not your media owner's audience, not your television channel's audience, not your newspaper publication's audience, your audience defined in real life and then located in real streets. And this is just an illustration of how that looks on a map, and where you find the clusters, where you look and see large numbers of like-type households, that you're in an area of great efficiency for DoorDrop, and you can have a very sort of effective, cost-effective sort of means of reaching lots of like-minded opportunities. And this is the point about DoorDrop, is it's still delivering scale. As the scale in digital through the regulation will begin to be diminished. So, our scale and our reach into virtually every home in the country is becoming more and more important for advertisers. And we take a lot of these data sets and we blend them together, because that's how you get the best models, whether, it's using real customer data, in terms of anonymized spend values. So you've got a value component in the model, and the profiling to obviously help you expand and find lookalikes, understanding things that influence things like broadband speeds or other expenditure patterns. Whatever it is, we will kind of use our methodologies to develop, hopefully, a predictive and bespoke model for you. And this is just something we did for Amazon. And as you can see, it's looking at the expenditure specifically on books, and how we can drive great value from it. And what you're looking at here is a decile model. And what you can see very clearly is that at the top of this model, in the best areas for this particular model, you've got the most users, most existing users, but you've also got the highest opportunity and the highest spend patterns from the marketplace and so forth. You need these models to be predictive and discriminating, and then you're onto a flying start for your campaign. And ultimately, we'll deliver you something that looks a little bit like this, your online catchment. This is for an e-commerce fashion retailer who didn't think they had a catchment, but actually, when you look at it in real life, you can see where their value comes from and where their opportunity sits is very clustered geographically. And so this again makes us a very, very efficient means of acquiring new customers. So this campaign drove a return on media investment of £4.45 for every pound spent. And importantly, of the transactions that were recorded from the campaign, 76% of them came from new customers. So really calling out those customer acquisition benefits of DoorDrop. GTech use it very regularly to support their Black Friday activity, and again, some really significant uplifts. Our ROMI of £2.53 for every £1 spent, and large numbers of incremental orders from brand new customers who they can then continue to talk to. Naked Wines, some interesting creative testing using DM formats in DoorDrop, which actually proved to be very effective for them. By far the most effective reach. That's something I think the charity world is very familiar with, but it's interesting to see it played out for an e-commerce brand as well. And every element of their testing actually delivered a positive ROI, but obviously out of that they learned which particular creatives were going to work best and could use that to roll out. And again, back to that point of targeting audiences that perhaps are unlikely audiences, unexpected audiences in DoorDrop. But this is Shein, fast fashion retailer. Again, using DoorDrop to drive traction and engagement with an online fashion show. QR code as a mechanism to deliver, focused on 4 regional cities. So they had a regional element to it, which again is why DoorDrop came part of that sort of channel mix, where geography again matters. So, again, a really positive story around that. Now, we understand that there's always innovation in marketing, and it's important that we continue to push the boundaries of what's possible in direct marketing and in marketing in general. And marketeers are always going to look for the new fad, the latest thing, because that's the thing that makes them headlines. But very often, the next big thing in marketing might sometimes be over their shoulder, maybe something they haven't considered. And one of the things that we want to do is obviously keep that as real as possible for people. And that's why we run sessions like this, why we sponsor things like JICMail, because we need to educate the marketplace that actually the integration of print and digital is in fact the most effective mix. So for us, it's very much about keeping it fun. And when we have brands like Ocado, who are delivering fantastic creative and great results from their door drops, it makes us very, very excited about the future of this channel. Thank you very much indeed. So now I hang up my presenting hat and go back to introducing, and I'm delighted to welcome to the virtual stage Sarah and Ben from Join the Dots.
Thanks, Mark. So I'll start with the obligatory sales pitch. So for those of you who aren't aware of who Join the Dots are, we're an award-winning media agency committed to working in a transparent and sustainable manner, helping our clients meet their acquisition goals, regardless of channel or medium. Now, there's a subliminal theme to my background, so I'll let that manifest itself. I'm not in the Amazon rainforest, nor is this a desktop filter. So today, we're going to talk about integration, or as we call it, joining the dots. And we know many of you will have seen a talk or a white paper about integrated marketing, and in particular talks about integrating print within your wider media mix. But we also know that few people actually execute integrated marketing campaigns, and that's what we're here to talk about today. Next slide, please, Mark. So in true integrated style, it's myself, Ben, managing partner, and Sarah, head of media partnerships and solutions, that are going to be presenting today. And we're going to cover the what, why, and the how of integrated marketing. We'll then go back to school for some show and tell and finish with our top tips. Next slide, please. So firstly, let's understand what is meant by integrated marketing. Next slide, please, Mark. So as any good planner would, we started research. And when we searched the dictionary, we got the following for integrated marketing: a type of marketing in which a company's salespeople, advertising, website, etc., all give the same messages about its products. And we found that the use of the word etc. shows that there's multiple aspects within a business that need to work together to be integrated. But we didn't like the same element, and we felt it was a little bit distracting. And in marketing, we don't believe that things should be the same, rather that they need to speak the same language, or at least work in harmony. And there's no reason why marketing should be integrated based on this explanation. In actual fact, the term for integrated aligns better with our message today. Next slide, please, Mark. And this works a little bit better in explaining how to really execute a successful integrated campaign, when 2 or more things are combined in order to become more effective. To be combined doesn't require being the same. It's about joining of things to make things better. And thankfully, we know this to be true. Next slide, please. So Thinkbox and Jikmail are industry thought leaders who shared data to show an increase in effectiveness from running integrated marketing campaigns. So forget about offline or online, above the line or below the line. Here we are simply talking about multiple media channels working in harmony to better one another. And it shouldn't ever be a case, as Mark talked about earlier, of print or digital, but print and digital, TV and digital, TV and print and digital, and so on. Next slide, please. And you can't do a talk about marketing without referencing either Binet or Field, as Mark did earlier. And it's not just us thinking about integration, nor is it the activation level where we need to think about integrating media or creative. And Les Binet, whilst discussing the latest Binet and Field research, the context in effectiveness, explains that integrating short-term activation and long-term brand building is another key form of integration, resulting in successful brands and marketing campaigns. Next slide, please, Mark. So given the evidence, why are so few brands and agencies actually executing integrating campaigns? I'm going to hand over to Sarah to unpack this in more detail now. Sarah.
Thank you very much. So yeah, some of the barriers to true integration that we've identified in the market are here. So starting with bias, and we all have biases, conscious or not, whether that's the suppliers that take us on the best jollies, that trading agreement that gets us the best revenue, or quite simply the thing we like planning the most. These biases mean that we're unable to make truly neutral decisions and actually can really impact what some agencies and brands will continue to do in their marketing. You've also got measurement. Now, again, as it's been alluded to in pretty much all of the presentations before this, measurement is so important to understanding what is working and, more importantly, optimizing for future success. But we often hear brands and agencies saying that they need to measure things with the same metrics, so that the cost per acquisition for all campaigns has to be X or Y, irrelevant of media channel and other factors. So it's really important to understand what good looks like in order to be able to make sure you can run integrated, successful campaigns. Now, expertise is another barrier that can sometimes come up. The world of marketing is really, really broad and vast, and you can see that just by the number of experts on the call today. None of us can profess to be experts in everything, but when we work together, we can create really great integrated campaigns. And actually, you know, in agency world, we like to be the leaders. We like to be in control of campaigns. But sometimes the best thing you can do for your campaign, your client's campaign, is to ask for help, reach out to partners, reach out to the specialists. It's easy to get scared if you don't have the expertise and just pretend that you know, or worse yet, divert the conversation and even divert the budget away from something that would be truly the right move. And finally, ways of working. Brands and agencies often have siloed teams, whether that's offline and online, acquisition, retention. So it does make it quite difficult to try and be truly integrated in our approach from the beginning, as Field and Binet talk about, right through to the activation, whether you sit in a print team or a TV team. They all have individual targets and P&L, so it can make it really hard for some agencies to be able to be truly neutral in their ways of working. So these potential barriers can stop for campaigns to be truly integrated. And it is more common than we think, given the evidence we've seen that supports integration. We simply can't imagine life like this, having never worked in this way. But here is an example on the next slide of what a typical planning approach is for many clients and agencies. Now, you might think, do you know what? This covers all the bases, and it does in silo. We look at what the target results are for the client, and then we take each of these 5 sectors and we look at them in isolation. What media are we going to propose? Who are we going to target within that media? What does the creative look like for that media? When are we going to go live? And then often as a last thought, attribution. This can often mean that you're looking, as I say, in silo rather than more holistically. If you go to the next slide, Mark, as I just mentioned, and as Ben has already alluded to, for us, integration at Join the Dots is key. Not just about integrating media, but as James mentioned earlier, the creative and the messaging are also core to success. So too are things like pricing, messaging, and also thinking about the wider context, including even the economy at the time. So when we started to think about our new brand, rebranding at the end of last year, we wanted to look back at all the things we had successfully done with our heritage, all the failures that we'd had potentially and why that might have been. And that's when we realized that integration was key to all the success that we had had. And hence, next slide, we decided to call ourselves Join the Dots. Next slide. So what do we actually mean when we say that we join the dots? Well, it sounds like a buzzword, but we are truly data first. If you've got data, we'll have it. Any format, if quite frankly it still came on a floppy disk, we would take it. We will use your data and get from it insights that will help us to plan accurately. And from that, what we mean is plan not just the media, but when to target somebody with the messaging, and understand that full lifetime journey, not just for acquisition, but from retention and the lifetime value of that person. We can then, because of using data, plan agnostically. And we can do that at Join the Dots because we have no separated media teams. We are one media team and we have one P&L and we have one business target. So it doesn't matter whose desk the brief lands on. They will look at the data and that will determine the media channels that we recommend. We are also able to look more to the future. Our heritage with Edit Agency as focusing on CRM means we can think more about the future as well. What kind of people do we want to acquire? Again, going back to that data that the client has provided us up front, who are the people they want to recruit that give them the best long-term return on investment? Again, thinking back to Benet and Field, who is it that's going to help us build a long-term brand? So we're able to use that data and our agnostic planning and our heritage to be future focused. And there's no pretty way or business way of saying it, but we have no skin in the game. We are simply put a media agency. We don't own printers, we don't own data. It means that we can work with the right partners for the right job and deliver the best campaign for our clients. It means we can be fully integrated in our planning approach with our clients and with our partners. So if you go to the next slide, Mark, it looks a little bit busier than that first slide we showed you just a little while ago. Again, we obviously start with those core central planning points, all focused around delivering the KPIs. But what's slightly different with our approach, as you'll see, and this is still the simplified version, is that we are delving another level into each of these sectors. So for targeting, we don't simply look at some TGI data, but we look at the emotional data. We use Jigmail data. We build bespoke data models that Mark's alluded to on varying levels, whether that's individual or household levels. And moving all the way around there to understanding exactly the timings. So looking at things like Google Trends, Google Analytics data of the client's website, looking at when competitors are live, using the data so that we can understand every single stage of the campaign, what needs to happen so that everything can work successfully. And if you go to the next slide, Mark, it goes beyond just that single campaign, and actually it becomes about understanding when we need to target customers and in what moment with what channel and to drive what effect. So as you'll see here, we can see the 4 different stages of trying to interact with the customer. And there's just some of the different media channels you can use at that point to engage with them. It allows us to understand, again, from a neutral position of what should be happening when and how that affects the long-term journey that our consumers are going on. If you go to the next slide, we want to start showing you actually what this looks like in action. This is a charity example, but it was an example to show what we were able to do for blind veterans when we used their data. We were given access to their donor data to be able to understand the media opportunities available for each of their donor segments. So this was based on things like age, on the donation method. And then from that, we were able to identify the best way to reach each of those different segments and grow them. And as you'll see, we've seen some really fantastic results. 24% increase in return investment. Apologies, that second one should say 18% increase in response rate, and a reduction in the cost per donor just by actually putting in that extra effort up front to tailor the media plans for each segment. And then moving on to a retail client of ours, Naturesan. They offer biodegradable 100% natural cat litter. Now, this is a perfect example, as everybody's alluded to before, of a purely digital brand exploring the world of print to drive online sales. When they came to us, they had purely been using digital channels to recruit new customers. However, as part of the Mars Pet Care Group, they'd been made aware of our work with other Mars Pet Care brands in the print space, primarily inserts and door drops. Now, with this one, it was a little bit tricky because there's no way of being able to identify exactly who cat owners are, but we were able to identify key aspects of a Naturesan customer, even from the limited data they had from being a new brand. Sustainability was key for them and therefore their customers. And we also knew the kind of female biased audience that bought their product. So we were able to place inserts within relevant titles, lifestyle titles, sustainability magazines that would allow them to reach the right audience. And actually, we were able to deliver an average order value that was 27% higher than they had currently had via digital channels, even with a higher discount. And we were delivering a cost per acquisition of up to 50% lower than digital. If you go on to the next slide, it will hopefully just show it's not us, but also the client that can agree with this. So they were heavily reliant on paid social, as I just said. And as many people are experiencing, the performance has been somewhat erratic, to say the least. And at least inserts were able to give them some element of stability, delivering really strong cost per acquisitions. And what I really enjoyed with this client is their ability to see what else print was able to offer them. Based on the publications and things that worked for them, they were able to identify more about their customers. Where were they? What interested them? What did they subscribe to? And that really helped build a picture of a customer base that was in its infancy. And also through print, as James has already alluded to, it can really give you the opportunity to explain a product, particularly when it's a new product, in depth, so that somebody can then make the decision to go online and purchase. So I'm aware that we have obviously covered quite a lot in a short space of time. So if you go to the next slide, we have picked our 5 top tips that we live by to integrate our campaigns. Can't say it enough, use the data. And not just the data you want to use, so the bit that tells you your channel, your preferred choice is the best, but actually using the data, as the next step says, is in an agnostic way to really understand who the audience is, who we need to reach, and how we reach them. And here where we say be agnostic, again, that's with the data, but again, it goes back to thinking completely neutrally. What is best for the client and what is best for the campaign? Ignore any of those other biases that you may not be aware you even have to make sure that you plan neutrally. And going on to that, if you don't have the expertise, work together. The industry is full of specialists. And actually, if we all work together, it's better for all of us and for the client in the end, delivering better and stronger campaigns. Challenging the norms. I know this is something that Ben has already shared, has come up quite a lot at the Campaign Media 360 event that's currently on in Brighton. It's about being bold and not just doing the same thing because that's what everybody else is doing. And we've quite enjoyed doing that. Since we've become Join the Dots, we've really started to be able to challenge what people accept as the norm and doing what we think is right based on the data, even if it's perhaps not what has been done for the last 6 or 7 years for clients' campaigns. But if we truly have the data and the insight, then we're happy to stand by our recommendations. And to that point, testing and optimizing. So that again could be challenging the norms. Test something that perhaps a client doesn't think is going to work. If you've got the data and the insight that says there's no reason why it shouldn't work, challenge them, test, and then continually optimize. Let's face it, when you make a pancake, the first one is never the best. Just like that, campaigns, as people have alluded to already on this call, don't necessarily work first time. You need to continually learn, test, and optimize to make sure campaigns work effectively. Thank you very much for your time. If you want to find myself or Ben, we're both on LinkedIn. You can find us at WeJoinDots, and also our website down there as well if you want to reach out for anything.
Amazing. That's fantastic, Sarah and Ben. Thank you so much. That's absolutely wonderful. And also a few culinary tips in there as well about pancakes. So all good. On matters food related, and very patiently waiting in the wings, is Hannah from Oddbox, who I'm delighted now to introduce it with for our final segment. You've heard from us, you've heard from agencies, you've heard from insight professionals, you've heard from creatives. Now, finally, you get to hear from a client. So, Hannah, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Mark. Hi, everyone. So, yeah, I'm going to talk about how a pure play digital advertiser, i.e. Oddbox, embraced print media and turned it to its advantage. I thought I'd actually start a little bit by saying a little bit about myself. So if we go on to the next slide. So here are some cringy pictures of me in my previous roles. The reason why it's relevant is because my previous roles were in paid digital. So my first big job out of university was about 6 years ago in a startup called Brain Labs, who some of you may have heard of. They're not quite startups anymore. At the time, Brain Labs specialized in PPC, but I joined quite a small paid social team. And from there, I helped them to build up their team and actually eventually became the head of paid social before I left. From there, I decided it was time for something a little bit different. And I decided to leave Brain Labs and join Oddbox, which is where I am now. At the time, my paid social skills were super relevant for Oddbox because Oddbox relied heavily on digital marketing for growth. However, here I am talking to you today about print media. So as you'll find out, I quickly developed and delved into the world of offline media, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit more. So if we go on to the next slide, the agenda for this session is who Oddbox are, in case you haven't heard of us, and what our mission is, how we grew, our reliance on paid digital, our first flyering campaign, our flyering expansion from there, the challenges and the key learnings. So if we go on to who we are, our mission. So rather than tell you a little bit about what we do, I thought it would be interesting first to take everyone to what our mission is to help explain what we do from there. So what is our mission and our vision? Well, quite simply, our mission is to fight food waste to save the planet, and our vision is a world where all food grown is eaten, which sounds very lofty, but there is a good reason for this that perhaps not everyone knows about. So for example, I don't know if everyone knows, but around 40% of all food grown goes uneaten at the moment, which wastes with it a huge amount of energy and water. And what's worse is that all that food waste is currently responsible for 10% of global emissions, making food waste one of the most addressable issues in the fight against climate change at the moment. So it's a huge issue and something that we want to tackle. So if we go on to the next slide, the question is, what are we doing about it? So that's where the Oddbox product comes in. We're trying to do our bit to fight food waste by rescuing the too wonky or the too odd or the too small or the too many, more often than not just surplus, fruit and veg that would have otherwise been at risk of going to waste. We then package all of this up and send it to our customers in a weekly or bi-weekly subscription and help enable them to do their bit at home. And if we go on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about how we've done this in our story from the beginning. So we started in 2016 when our founders, husband and wife couple, Emily and Deepak, tasted a delicious but ever so slightly ugly tomato in a market in Portugal. And this is where the idea for Oddbox formed. It struck them that we only ever see aesthetically pleasing fruit and veg in our supermarkets. And when they did some digging, they learned that roughly 40% of all food grown goes uneaten. And that a lot of this waste happens because there's often just too much of it, or because it doesn't meet the strict cosmetic standards of our supermarkets today. So this is where Oddbox was born. We started in Brockley in London, and over the next 3 years, we expanded to cover the whole of London. And instead of telling farmers what to grow, we asked farmers what was already growing and going spare. And so we started the supply-led model that we have today. In 2020, we saw huge growth, as did many other food companies, and we expanded out of London and into the south. We also became a B Corp, which was huge for us, and we committed to being net zero by 2030. In 2021, we followed on from that great success of expansion and expanded into a whopping 75% of the UK, which is very big for us as well. And in 2022, we've continued to grow. We saw our biggest month yet at the beginning of 2022, and we have lots of other things on the horizon. So if we go on to the next slide, how did we grow so quickly? Well, the answer is actually just through a lot of hard work and testing of different channels. A lot of hard work came from our founders and our early employees and the early marketing team, which I definitely can't take credit for. They ran lots of different channels. They did some small scale flyering that you can see there when we were called Tasty Misfits. They delivered by themselves, of course. They did PR stunts, as you can see on the left. They went to Wimbledon dressed up as strawberries and petitioned for the strawberries that would get thrown away that year at Wimbledon. And we did do some influencer gifting, which was successful for us. But what we did come back to again and again, I'm afraid to say in this seminar, but we did come back to digital marketing, which by 2020 was actually one of our main channels. Now, if we go on to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit more about how we became reliant on paid digital and what the implications were. So if we look back at 2020, our largest investment by far was on paid social, and within that mostly on Instagram. This in turn fueled our PPC growth, especially PPC brand, which meant that by the end of 2020, about 80% of our budget went on these two channels, so Google and Meta. And they were our largest two performance channels. Our second largest channel was influencers, but again, this was mainly on Instagram. And so the main implications of this, and what we've seen from quite a few people talking today, is that we were targeting similar people again and again, city-based young women between the ages of 25 and 35 who had the money to pay for different ways of buying groceries. Both the marketing team at Oddbox and also Facebook's algorithm, or I should say Meta's algorithm, soon believed that this was the only audience for us. We kind of got stuck in that cycle. And then this reliance was fueled by the tailwinds of the pandemic. We basically exploded in March 2020 as everyone wanted food delivery. So much so that we actually had to turn our website off for a while as we simply couldn't take on any more customers. We continue to see that huge interest at each stage of the pandemic, which whilst was great for growth, meant that we essentially rested on our laurels a little bit. Before the pandemic, we had tested different channels, but why test more channels when you're constantly exceeding your targets with your current channel mix? So by the summer of 2021, however, we started to see a few headwinds. The first, and again, something we've already talked about today, was Apple's release of iOS 14.5, which asked all iPhone customers if they wanted to opt out of tracking. This was a great move for consumers, so for you and I, however, not so great for businesses. The data that had once allowed us to optimize so well on Facebook or Meta was gradually limited as iPhone customers started to update their phones one by one and reduced our conversion rates and made Facebook far less efficient for us. At the same time, we also had another headwind and we were seeing the world start to open up again. Again, this was great for you and I and for consumers, but not so great for us as a business. Our target audience were no longer had the time on their hands to cook, and instead were eating out, going on holiday, and just getting back to their old lives. So between these two events, by the end of 2021, we were starting to see a little bit of a slowdown in our customer acquisition and our customer revenue. So what did we do about it? Well, luckily, on the next slide, thank you, we have an amazing agency called Journey Further who came aboard in August 2020 and had slightly foreseen these problems. with our over-reliance on paid digital, and had already tested a flyering campaign at the tail end of 2020 in conjunction with a third-party agency who specialised in print. Now, this agency offered us the expertise we needed to test flyering at a granular level, and in particular, they offered us the creative capacity, the analytical capacity, and the testing capacity for this particular test. There were a few worries in-house, which maybe a few of you can relate to. So worries about the environmental impact, that flyering might be too invasive, or the worries that the creative wasn't quite on brand for us as a company. We managed to limit the environmental impact by making sure all the paper we used was either recycled or FSC and was all carbon offset. We addressed the invasive worries by making sure that if we did use any address mailers, they were all partially addressed. And finally, we ensured that the brand team had the final creative sign off on everything. So hopefully everything was on brand enough for them. And with this first wave of flyering, we ran tests within our creatives, our format, our offers, and also our geo-targeting. And that enabled us to measure the incremental uplift. So all in all, at the end of the test, the results were really positive. We saw that we actually had the same CPAs as in-platform Facebook. And this is really significant because at the time, it was before the iOS changes. So Facebook was actually over attributing in-platform. And this CPA was 20% below target. And we also exceeded our subscriber targets by 27%. So at the end of the test, we effectively found a channel that we could use as a flex channel to scale as and when we needed extra subs. So if we go to the next slide, when we go back to the summer of 2021, and we were looking for a new channel to turn to, flyering was a bit of a no-brainer. However, the only problem was that we lacked the control whilst using an agency. We found that the creators weren't quite as on brand as we'd like. And for the effort that we put into making them on brand, we'd be better off doing it ourselves. We also lacked the flexibility to run small tests in new areas. So what we did was we turned to Whistle, and we started working with Whistle, who offered us the ability to work in-house while still getting good rates and still getting support that we needed, especially for me being from a pretty much only digital background. We launched our first big campaign with Whistle in September of 2021 to great results. We continue to see the same great CPAs that we'd got in that smaller test that we'd previously done, but at scale, which was the crucial point. And from here, we quickly incorporated flyering into one of our BAU channels. And between September 21 and March 22, flyering has basically become one of our biggest channels, driving the most or the highest volume of subscriptions. We've managed to run 12 tests on both our targeting and creative, letting us build up a stronger picture of what works and making it quite optimizable, similar to what we would have been doing on paid social and digital. And then off the back of purchasing our own Experian data, we've also built up our own custom targeting model in-house, which has helped us increase our conversion rates, but also increase our lifetime value. And finally, we've seen that flyering is not only a great channel for conversions at scale, but also for that strong lifetime value to CAC ratio that we're looking for. And you can see here an example of one of the flyers, one of our key kind of 2-pager door drops that we come back to time and time again, that we tested from the very beginning. Now, if we go on to the next slide, there have been challenges along the way, so it hasn't quite been perfect. The biggest challenge we've had is how to stay aligned to our values with a form of marketing that, well, we thought had a bigger carbon footprint than digital, but we've just found out that it doesn't necessarily have that. So as I said earlier, we tried to overcome this challenge by only using recycled or FFC paper. It always has to be recyclable, and it has to be carbon offset. We've also worked with some great B Corp printers, one of which, C Corp, uses no water during the printing process, which makes it even more sustainable and environmentally friendly. And we also changed our flyering design to have a key call out on there to people, to encourage people to either pass the flyer on if they're not interested, or if they're already with a competitor, or if not, to recycle it. So hopefully we've kind of overcome that challenge somewhat. The next challenge was engagement versus efficiency. So we've tested lots of different formats. We normally typically always run door drops, but we have tested partially addressed mailers. We've also tested 4 pages and 6 pages. We love the fact that the larger formats allow us to have more information on there, and we always see a higher engagement with those larger formats, so the 4 pages and the 6 pages. However, we've always also found that we drive the better efficiency with the 2 pages. So that's why you'll see that more often than not, we do use those 2-page door drops for our flyering activity. And then in terms of fatigue, it's also been quite a big problem for us, and one that we're facing at the moment. We've now sent out millions of flyers, and some households have seen our flyers multiple times. We now have to think outside the box a little bit on how we keep these potential customers engaged and to keep the channel effective. And then finally, attribution. Again, it's something that we've talked a lot in this session, but we've had to look at attribution in slightly different ways. So for most of our measurement, we use coupon codes and coupon code redemption. But we've actually found that the true incremental uplift of our flyering activity is higher than what we're seeing just through coupon redemptions, which I'm sure is probably very similar for everyone. To analyze this and to get kind of exact data on it, we have run geo tests, which luckily is very easy with flyering and door drops in particular. And we have clear holdout regions that allow us to measure what the incrementality of that activity was, and then apply this to our attribution model. So at different times, for example, we can have an incremental uplift of 2 or 3 times what we're seeing with our coupon attribution, which is really useful to know and helps us evaluate how much we want to reinvest in the channel going forward. And then finally, on my last slide is our key learnings. So hopefully the first one should be quite obvious by now. Avoid one channel reliance. Not only does this put you in a bit of a sticky position if something changes within that channel, like we've all seen with Meta, it also restricts your customer demographic and doesn't allow you to scale. So once we started our flyering, we actually saw that we weren't just stuck in kind of that niche demographic of younger women who are in cities. We managed to kind of expand to older demographics, families as well, which has really helped our lifetime value too, our CAC to lifetime value ratio. Think about in-housing versus agency. We saw some great results with the agency that we used. But we also managed to get that flexibility that we wanted by in-housing. The third one is always test your creatives and your audience. We always employ a test and learn approach, and we've gathered lots of great insights from the tests that we've done. We know, for example, that when we launch in new areas, a very slimmed back 2-pager works better than when we're hitting an area again, at which time a 2-pager with more information about us actually works better, which is counterproductive or different to what I would have thought it would be. But because we have those results, we can be confident in those learnings. And finally, make sure you do run those regional tests with holdout groups, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time proving to stakeholders what the actual effect of your flyering is.